And welcome back from the weekend. Hope you all had a great one as we get ready to kick off this week. Talking a little head coach with Nick Nurse. We haven't talked much about him, so we kick off this week by doing so. Welcome to the PHLY Sixers podcast, along with Derek Bodner and Kyle Neubeck. I'm Devon Givens, filling in for Bree. Bree is off today, folks. Tyler Zulli. We're in capable hands with Tyler Zulli from the PHLY Phillies podcast. Of course, make sure you check them out each and every day, and especially those
no pressure shows. Tyler.
No pressure at all here on this Monday. But guys, the finals right now are at 2-0 Boston. We'll see what happens when the series shifts on Wednesday to Dallas. See if the Mavs can take and protect their home floor just like the Celtics did. But mostly looking at what the coaches are also doing and how they're impacting the series at this moment. So we figured we would talk about what happened this season in year one with Nick Nurse, but also just kind of looking ahead of how much of a difference Nick Nurse can make for this team with the roster that's going to be put together and how much is going to be on him coming in to push them finally over the top and get them to where many Sixer fans want them to be. And that is, of course, contending once again for a championship, but this time from the NBA Finals chair and sideline and not just from the second round, which is what he was not brought in here for. So we have a lot to talk about that, some NBA stuff overall from the association from the weekend. We'll get into that. But Kyle, as we start things off with Nick Nurse here, looking at what he needs to do to get this team and push them in that right direction. What are your thoughts on Nick Nurse from year one, what he did, what he needs to do to, again, get this team over the hump so we're finally done talking about second round only?
Well, first of all, I'm already getting roasted by our guy Eugene for my hair today. I don't know why. It's
What's that,
there's
Gene?
no
on?
product in it and no
Straight
hat
edge.
on. So it's just, I don't know that it's straight edge as Eugene is calling it. It's just it's my hair. I got a nice cowlick up front, right? So
Look like you're good to me.
just got to deal with it from time to time.
I know.
Just like I do. So on the Nick Nurse front.
Yes.
I would say I was whelmed by his first season is probably
Nobody ever says that. You can be overwhelmed, you can be underwhelmed. Nobody says
I was whelmed. I would lean, if anything, toward underwhelmed, but I don't feel especially strongly about that. I think we saw flashes of, okay, this is why this guy built the reputation he did prior to even getting to the head job in Toronto, and certainly when you had the title season and the season after that, which I've said on the show many times, that I think was his best coaching job, 2019-20, Kawhi leaves. They still have a lot of the pieces of that title team. And, who knows how it plays out if there's no COVID, no Disney World bubble, how everything goes. But that was a tremendous defensive team that his strengths as an adaptive coach, a tactical game-to-game type guy really shined with that team. So I think we saw less of that from him this year. If anything, and I said this on the show, I thought that he skewed more conservative and closer to his predecessor, Doc Rivers, than many people were expecting in terms of not playing the young guys as many minutes as people would like. And look, I tried to warn people coming in, Nick Nurse is a guy who's going to play the best players, play the veterans, do the things that you expect most NBA coaches to do. And while we were able to get those brief glimpses at a Ricky Council, who then eventually earned himself a contract and a spot there, it was kind of business as usual in terms of how the rotation was set. Now, there were some more play-to-play, game-to-game wrinkles. I thought there were individual matchups where we saw, okay, this is a coaching staff that is taking prep work seriously. So one of the ones that stood out for me was, do you remember the home game they had against Sacramento where Sabonis was in a really good groove coming into that game and they just completely shut him down, used Tobias as that big defender and mixed and matched some things around that. And that to me was like, oh, this is the sort of thing we might see in the playoffs. I think one of the big problems he ran into, and I think this will end up being a theme of the show for how we look at Nurse for next season, was just that the roster was never really whole throughout the year. Obviously, Joel missing all the time he did played a big part. but also the DeAnthony Melton factor, right? Like DeAnthony is a guy who helps tie a lot of lineups together, who gives you that type of versatility at the guard spot. As let's say you're playing really small, you play 3 guards. He can guard up a little bit because he's got the big wingspan and the athleticism. So his absence, I think, played a big role in how the rotation played out and their inability to do things like throw a full court press at teams and do some of the stuff that he had success with in Toronto. So once they got to the playoffs, I thought you saw that reflected in the approach to the Knicks series, because I would say if there was anything I was disappointed in, it was how that series played out, and how, I guess the biggest deal was just they couldn't win minutes without Joel on the floor, but they didn't really look for any unique answers. There was never, hey, we're going to throw Ricky or KJ or one of these guys in there. And as we said during the series, it's not to say that it would have worked, but I thought it was at least worth looking at stuff like that. So that's where I think if I was disappointed, I would point to, was that when it was actually time for him to be okay, I'm the creative X's and O's guy against Tibbs, who they run what they run, they do what they do, and we just have to find ways around that. He coached a lot more like Tibbs than I think people would have expected or hoped for.
Yeah, we were talking about this before the show, and the question was posed, like, what does Nick Nurse have to do to help the Sixers advance? And for the most part, I think it's get better players, which is why we spent the first month of this offseason talking about the players they could acquire, and then we went today, oh shoot, we really haven't talked too much about Nick Nurse yet.
Yeah.
Let's have this show. Players matter more than the coach. The coach adapts to the players, but ultimately, if the players aren't good enough, then you're going to struggle. There are little things that I could nitpick, like after the Sixers acquired Buddy, I thought he should have played more with Joel Embiid. It seemed like Nick kind of tied Buddy to the non-Embiid minutes and had Tyrese, Maxey, and Kyle Lowry out there to start. And quite frankly, I thought you need Kyle Lowry on the floor more when Embiid's not there, because you need somebody then to run a little offense, maybe free Maxey to run off ball. You need Buddy on there when Joel's there. I would have liked a little bit of that reversed. I thought in the beginning of the season, he empowered Paul Reed a little bit too much. And we spoke a lot about when you simplify Paul Reed's role, you get a better version of Paul Reed. So I can nitpick that. Although quite frankly, I think losing James Harden was an even bigger factor in Paul's struggles this year. I don't think he had maybe as many answers as you expected, but I also don't think he's near the top of the list of the problems either. I did think that we saw a little bit of more like Nick Nurse in his natural state during those 2 months without Joel Embiid, when they really ramped up the defensive pressure, helped keep them competitive. I thought they defended well over those 2 months. I thought they forced turnovers. It felt like a Nick Nurse team for a little bit more. But for the most part, I think they need to get better players.
Wow, that's a controversial opinion over there, Derek.
And for me, which we talked about this more so in-house, maybe some outside just discussions about what Nick Nurse, because for me, as you talked about with the players part of it, needing those players, for a while there, I looked at it and said it was somewhat incomplete. So it was right along of that whelmed part of it, just because he didn't have DeAnthony Melton for a big part of the season. Joel went down for 29 games and missed some sporadic ones here and there. And those are 2 of your main keys to what you do with your lineup. Yeah. So it's with Embiid on the floor with Melton. Sometimes Melton's on the floor with Maxey when Joel was off the floor. And if Tobias Harris is not picking up some of the slack, you would see Melton do some different things and help out there. And that's why it's a little unfair to say incomplete, because of course you have a complete season and you do some things. But for a good portion of it, while I wasn't saying he was perfect, I was just looking at it as I would really like to evaluate him with a complete roster and see what he does with it, because the roster then got turned over at the trade deadline because you lost some of the depth that you did have with Marcus Morris, along with having Patrick Beverley, with Batum, and some of the guys that came in, Robert Covington now out of the lineup. You didn't have enough there where I wanted to see those things of that tinkering that we've seen from Nick Nurse in the past. And what does he do with this particular roster to make that happen when you have a guy like Joel Embiid, who is a superstar player in this league? And so that's where I was. And I put it out front there. I was a Nick Nurse guy coming in of, hire that guy, because I think he is good enough. I saw what he did with Toronto. I want to see if he can do that same thing here. And while I saw a lot of good things, there were those times where, where's Ricky? It wasn't just because we had fun in making Ricky a part of our show. It was because of
we could see
saw
what he brought to
spots.
the table.
There was lacking of energy. There was lacking of corralling a rebound with two hands. There was a lacking of snatching a rebound out of the air and even taking it from a 7-footer like Mo Bamba because he wanted it more. And that was, where are you pulling that when we've seen it work before? Yes, it was just Washington, but we also saw it in other spots too with it. We didn't see enough. So there were times where, of course, I pointed at Nick Nurse because there are 82 games that he's not going to do everything right. But there were plenty of good things that I saw, some bad. But I'll lean right there in between the guys of there was whelmed and there was need more players there for Nick Nurse in this season. And we have, of course, a lot to talk about of what he can do, where does he stand with the other coaches in the NBA. But that was kind of where I was of that. It's kind of incomplete just because of you still won 47 games. Joel Embiid helps that when you win 8 games in a row to get to 47, fighting for that, 4, 5, and 6 seed to try to sneak into there. That a lot of that was him too, with Joel Embiid coming back and having find ways to mix and match personnel for what you did have available to you. That Buddy Hield piece is absolutely correct. And next season, once they put this team together and basically doing it from scratch with your 2 stars, I want to know how much input he has in that too, of what he likes and what type of player that we've seen in Toronto and how much of that is now going to be a part of this roster come up.
And I do think they didn't necessarily explicitly say this when Nurse was hired. I do think a big part of the Nurse draw was that Morey has the long-standing relationship with him.
Yep.
They have similar views on how the game should be played, what types of players that it requires to play that way. And so even if it's not, Nurse being in the room and saying, I want this guy, I think there's at least an understanding of these are the types of players that I like and that I can use and that will help the team. And I don't want to hammer the Melton piece too hard just because I'm certainly not giving a guy an incomplete because of a player that we have all agreed, right? That is, you had to know coming in to a certain extent that if you're relying that heavily on DeAnthony Melton, you're in trouble, and that's a roster thing and all that. I would say the positive thing that I saw, that this actually went against, I guess, the end of Nurse's tenure, was that I do think the buy-in was fairly high. And I do think the buy-in you got specifically from someone like Kelly Oubre, who admittedly was in I don't want to call it his last chance.
Great point.
But it was definitely, you're on a minimum after being a 2-year, $20 million type of contract type of player, going from, hey, I'm signing for good teams or signing for good money, to this is your last real chance to prove yourself on a good team. Otherwise, you're in complete obscurity. And Nurse got the best out of him that I think they could have expected, right? And I think he got the best out of a decent handful of guys. Like Cam Payne came in, and one of the reasons people were so mad about that whole trade, other than the Patrick Beverley, Philadelphia folk hero moment that he had for those few months, was that Cam Payne was looked at as like, well, he's not going to play. He's not going to help. And especially when you bring Lowry in, it's like, okay, well, what does this do for the team? They found a role for Cam Payne. Cam Payne settled in and came in off the bench, brought his energy, did his thing, did himself off the bench. And, there are a lot of guys, you give the players more credit for the whole staying ready thing. Like when Ricky is, out of the rotation for 2 months and then all of a sudden has to play and has a big game. It's mostly on the player, but I think it speaks to the environment that was created, not just by Nurse, but the whole coaching staff.
Think about what
that guys
Kelly
could
Oubre
come
said
in and,
to you at the end of the year. We call him a rock star.
Yeah. And all these positive reviews. Now, look, I do think when you have a bunch of guys on expiring contracts, when you have a bunch of guys who know everything they do, everything they say is under scrutiny, that's going to influence what they say to you about the coach, how they handle their business as they're working toward that. Contract year is a contract year, and that's certainly no shade toward any of the players who are on their best behavior, their best media training, all of that. That being said, the more important part is on the floor. Getting a Kelly Oubre to go from he's got the tools, but he's an inconsistent defender, to the end of the season, he had like 2.5, 3 straight months where some outlier games aside, he was locked in the whole way. And so that's a credit to Kelly, which we've said on the show many times.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a credit to Nurse for getting through to him and getting that message through. Like, if you do this, not only are a lot of minutes available to you here, paydays and future opportunities are there for you, whether it's here or elsewhere. And I think he did a good job of managing what could have been a very volatile situation with a lot of guys on expirings and, fighting their own individual interest versus the teams.
You hear that, Phil W? Praising your guy, man. Praising your guy. How much money you going to get him this offseason? Just curious.
Are you asking me or Phil W?
Phil W.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious.
His agent.
His agent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phil W, the agent. I'm curious where he goes.
No, I mean, I think the point Kyle brought up, though, like when you have an entire roster of people on expiring contracts, like we said that at the very beginning of the season, like, oh, they should have the most buy-in you'll ever see because all of these guys are fighting for their next contract, sometimes fighting for their NBA lives. You bring up Kelly. Kelly can't act out. Kelly can't dog it. Kelly can't give you bad effort because he's on a minimum deal, and who knows if he's going to get that next contract. If he does, he can't complain about his minutes. He can't do any of that. So it's hard to really decipher whether or not that is, being a Kelly whisperer or just the reality of the situation that you're in. And that was an entire team. Like, we've almost never seen anything like that in NBA history.
It's pretty unprecedented
you give him
in
some
terms of
credit
teams I've
for keeping
covered.
everyone together for sure, but also they needed to be together.
Yeah.
They needed to be.
All right. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about Nick Nurse as we keep going forward here. Look at what he needs to do next with this new group that they put together.
You know who needs to be together?
Who's that?
You, me, and some Ollipops. And I know Derek's got one
Derek's
over there.
got
A
one.
nice cherry cola on the left side of the set. Guys, Ollipop is a new kind of soda with only 2 to 5 grams of sugar, 9 grams of fiber per can. It is available online and in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including the most recent launch at all Wawa stores. You can scoop a classic root beer or strawberry vanilla at a Wawa near you. I'm going to be honest, I stopped through a Wawa this weekend. I was driving down to see some friends in Baltimore, and I had another type of beverage on my mind. I was looking through the options, and I saw that cooler, and I saw they got that strawberry vanilla. I've been speaking the good word about to the people at home. I was like, I got to live up to the billing. I grabbed that, and it was a nice, refreshing drink on my drive down to Baltimore. I even brought a couple down for our friends who had not had them.
Okay.
Got strong reviews.
I saw your favorite in the Wawa yesterday, strawberry vanilla. Well, one of your favorites.
Yeah.
One of your favorites.
I still think the classic, they got to get the classic grape into the Wawas because
that will really
in Target
make
and
a
some of these other
difference.
places, you have the bigger variety.
Yes.
Got it. Olipop, let's talk expansion. I got to get all these flavors to the people through Wawa because Wawa is where the people are at. In
Definitely
Pennsylvania, South Jersey, all our areas that we cover here, PHLY. But look, Olipop has plenty of classic flavors. Also have no added sugar with 2 to 5 grams of sugar from natural sources in every can. Vintage cola, classic root beer, orange squeeze, classic grape, strawberry vanilla, cream soda, the cherry cola that Derek is drinking, the Good Luck ginger ale that Devon was drinking.
That's correct.
During the playoffs, watermelon lime. There's another one. I've been trying to get one of those. Haven't seen many of those in the wild, so people are obviously liking those. You can use the code PHLY20 for 20% off of your next Olipop order. Discount applies to one-time orders, not to subscriptions. Olipop is sold online at drinkolipop.com and on Amazon, and it's available in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including Wawa, Target, Sprouts, Wegmans, ShopRite, and GoPuff.
All right. Well, also got to tell you about Bet Parks Casino and the great things they're doing over there. The Femmes of Rock play classic rock on violins. Cool act that they headline at Parks Casino this Friday night. Upcoming this Friday night, Sebastian Bach, former lead singer of Skid Row, brings his solo tour to headline on Saturday night.
I heard he's bringing Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart
Is he
potentially.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe
good job.
Ludwig van Beethoven as well.
That's a good job. And let's look at a couple of other dates. August 23rd, 2024, the Southern Rock of the Marshall Tucker Band. And another date, September 7th, 2024, Australian Pink Floyd, the best band. Kyle Neubeck, to be able to see them here locally in town.
There's a Marshall Tucker Band song I really like too, and I'm blanking on the name. So shout out to the Marshall Tucker Band.
All right. All at Parks Casino, the #1 casino experience in the state of Pennsylvania. Parks Casino. This is how you win. They have it all. It's my casino of choice. Parks Casino has 3,200 state-of-the-art slots, 115 live table games, a beautiful poker room, and an opportunity for you in the sports book with a watch all the games there with a 150-foot video wall plus the ultra cool Times Lounge. Myself, been there plenty of times, same with Tyler Zulli, having to do a lot of work in there. The sports book is fantastic. So go visit parkscasino.com. That's Parks Casino. This is how you win. Must be 21. Gambling problem. Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
The Marshall Tucker Band song is called Take the Highway.
Take the highway. All right.
Recommend it. Go take a listen when you're done listening to the show today.
And if you want to see them, that's August 23rd at Parks Casino.
There you go.
All right. Couple of people throw in some money in there real fast. Jake Firestone. Derek, I'd give Kelly 30 over 3 years.
No.
Okay.
Goodbye and good luck, Kelly Oubre.
Well, I mean, mostly because that's over the room mid-level. That would be the only guy.
Right.
I've said this before. My cap is that room mid-level, which is 2 years, $8 million per. My concern is he'll get more than that, but I can't give him more than that because then that would limit what you can do elsewhere in free agency.
Also, his agent, Phil W., says his agent trying to get him 20, literally guard 4 positions. As a Sixers fan, hope he gets 15 million, LOL.
Well,
see you later.
Happy trails. We'll do one of those.
See you later.
Our version of like Gone Fishing on Inside. We'll do a Happy Trails and just do a Photoshop of Kelly Oubre just walking down the road with the like, what's it, like the stick with the
bag on the back of
the railway guy hopping on the.
And part of this is just the situation the Sixers are in, right? Like if they're an over the cap team with his bird rights, you would go, all right, well, I'm sitting here at 216, $8 million per. You're telling me 10 million per for 3 years gets it done. Maybe you concede on that. It's just by doing that, you do not have that second cap slot anymore to go out and pursue someone. Yeah. It is a reflection of the situation the Sixers are in. We
could just actually borrow from the Suns when he was there, because when he was there for one of the City Edition years, they did some Western type theme for their stuff.
Put him on a horse with and we've seen him wear the cowboy hat and the whole deal.
He might have been the only one that did the horse thing on the video, if I'm not mistaken, just because he was there when Kel was there, and I remember that. So there's that. All right, couple of super chats we do have in here. Brian Pumper is in here. Late double teams killed the Embiid offense. Improved passer, but not consistent. Hopefully, Joel will learn how to win in Team USA. This is on number 21.
So as we're talking about the nurse stuff here, I guess, how do you feel he did with designing things around Joel relative to Doc?
Well, just real quick on his point, like certainly game 4, he had the huge turnover game. He had one game where he had a monster turnover night, almost had a quadruple.
I think it was game 4. I don't know if he had the monster turnover game, but that was the game where they lost it in the fourth quarter, or it was like a down the stretch type of game, but they had the chance to blow it open in the third.
Right.
And he had 3 turnovers in the span of like 2
I'm pretty
minutes.
sure he had the one game where he almost had a quadruple double with turnovers. That was bad. For the most part, outside of that, I didn't think turnovers were a massive
problem. That might have
problem.
been game 5 that Tyrese saved his bacon. I don't remember. It's all kind of blending together at this point.
Regardless, because we're getting off track here, he had one game where he had a monster turnover night and it was a real problem. Outside of that, I didn't think, and that stretch that Kyle was talking about in the third quarter when they could have pushed it open. Outside of that, I didn't think for the series as a whole he was too bad. And the Sixers, when he was on the floor, executed pretty well offensively. He certainly has his moments with turnovers. I'm not going to deny that. I just don't think that was a story of this playoff run.
Yeah. I thought he did okay, but again, I just would have liked to have seen a few other things. I thought, to your point about the buy-in playing off of Embiid, having those handoffs that he would have with Tyrese Maxey out there right around the perimeter, right around the three-point line, those handoffs. For him, you saw a lot of that early action, some of the ISO stuff. That's normal. But the pick and rolls and the pick and pops with Maxey were pretty good, as we talked about some of the improvement of Maxey in that role. But I didn't think it was all that bad. And then when he did recognize, we saw it early when they were really humming and they were really going well, those backdoor cuts along the baseline where Kelly would make himself available. and things of that nature. I thought he did pretty good with those and how he played off of what Embiid's strengths are. But to the buy-in point, as you mentioned, I thought Embiid bought into Nurse's offense overall, and then he missed 29 games. So when he came back, we saw some of the old Embiid stuff in there that would have some people scratching their head and saying they didn't like the offense.
Yeah, so I think the stuff I liked was how they iterated around. Obviously, most of Joel's offense has moved to around the nail and the elbow, and that was an evolution that he made under Doc, and they added on top of that, right? The cutting off of him that we're talking about. One of the things that I want to see more that I don't think we saw enough, and this will require Joel to be both a good passer and decision maker, is to bring him up higher on some of these screens for Tyrese and to avoid these situations where a lot of times when the offense got bogged down, and not necessarily because when Joel and Tyrese are on the floor, generally everything flowed pretty well. The offense and both ends were at a high level. But when Tyrese gets forced side to side and can't turn that corner and they're just wasting 10 to 12 seconds of the shot clock and they're trapping him, I would like to see them, like Joel, come out to basically half court and screen for Tyrese, because then the decision is, okay, if we want to try to blitz here, then you give Joel a 4-on-3. And he can easily, if he wants to pull up for a little jumper at the free throw line, that's certainly in his wheelhouse. If they then collapse on him, presumably he's got easier passing reads where if a guy's coming from the strong side corner, just hit that guy. Whether you trust Joel to be a consistently good decision maker on the move is another story. And this might be more something that they do with whoever the backup is, if that's Paul Reed, if there's another guy like an Andre Drummond type where the passing can get a little adventurous from him if it ends up being him. But I'd like to see them try to hunt more of those situations rather than so many of the screens are coming at the same level. And I just think they need to do more to stretch the defense where if they're going to sell out to stop Tyrese, that's okay. You just need to turn that against them. You have to weaponize that in some way. I think that's one of the tactical things that I was disappointed in, but I think it's an easy enough fix that if you go back and look at it, they have probably seen that themselves.
Well, what's weird is those high screens, I feel like they're doing a little bit at the beginning of the year and then they sort of got away with it.
Yeah.
I do wonder with a lot of what we're talking about, like how much of this was stuff that they were going to evolve into, in February and March and didn't have an opportunity to because Joel was out and they were just trying to get back to vanilla in time for the playoffs. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. But like I said, I thought it was something that we were seeing a little bit earlier on in the season and then they went away from it. And like you mentioned the buy-in, I thought they did a much better job, especially early in the year and then a little bit later, of cutting off of Joel. That's something that Brett Brown pretty much didn't do because at that point he just wanted Joel to know where his outlets were. Doc brought it in a little bit more, but I thought they were doing that better than they ever have in terms of that cut off of Joel. Let's see more of it, and let's see more of it when you have a $40 million a year guy who will actually shoot the ball when he's open. That helps.
Oh, that helps. What a blessing.
Yeah.
If
but Oubre was really good
there
of making himself available.
Yes.
Oubre was in those spots. Another one from DFJ Hoops off of this point. If Nurse has a team that fits his coaching philosophy, he can turn that team into a contender. The caliber of players makes the team a contender or not.
Yeah, and that's one thing where, like, defensively, this team doesn't fit his philosophy at all. Like, he wants a bunch of 6'8" guys who can barely dribble. That part, maybe not, but that's what he had in Toronto.
I mean, any coach wants a bunch of 6'8" guys who can do everything would be the perfect world.
But defensively, like, he wants to switch everything. He wants to be aggressive in terms of trapping on the perimeter and recovering. And the Sixers are built around a drop big and a really small guard. And that's pretty much the exact opposite of what he had for his entire tenure in Toronto. Offensively, we don't really know his philosophy because, like I mentioned, those 6'8" guys he had in Toronto could barely dribble and he had no shooting. So we're still trying to figure out what he is offensively as a coach. But yeah, I would like to give Daryl a summer to build a team around what Nick wants to do. Whereas last year they were obviously handcuffed both because of Tobias Harris's monster contract and also because of James Harden and his demand.
But looking at the Kawhi season when they did win the championship, and he was the 1A clear cut, just like Joel is. ISO kind of guy for what he does in that Nick Nurse offense. Of course, you had Kyle Lowry, another all-star, similar here for Tyrese Maxey. So if you do look at that roster, and they did have a lot, they had Pascal Siakam, young guy, OG Anunoby. He was banged up at the championship run, but he was there. Fred VanVleet, the smaller guy, Norm Powell also on that team. Is there any type of similarity that you see from that roster that you would want to see here? 6'8", we got that part. But two guys that are ISO-oriented can play off of the team philosophy. Does that do anything for you for what you see, even though this is a big man versus that 6'8" wing that they had?
A little bit. It's obviously very different. Like you've mentioned this before, and players coming in, like they've never played off of somebody like Joel Embiid, and Nick Nurse has never coached someone like Joel Embiid because there just isn't a player like Joel Embiid. And obviously with Toronto, they're not going to run as much DHO, stuff like that. Well, they did with Mark, obviously, but there's just not someone like Maxey on that roster that would run it. So I do think it is pretty unique. And I mean, Kawhi, when he's locked in, he just makes every tough pull-up jumper imaginable. Can't really replicate that. Each player, each star specifically, is their own star.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, you brought up Kawhi's name.
Yes.
Brings up some bad memories for a lot of people around here.
I didn't want to do that part. Yeah.
And when you go through, a traumatic experience like that,
there were a lot of chill. I don't know if they were choosing chill, but they needed to choose chill.
When there are, sure. I wouldn't call this an annoyance. I would call this a soul-crushing, gut punch defeat, whether it's in your life or in the lives of a sports team that you follow. There's always a better way. There is a chiller way. And when you choose chill after watching someone rip your heart out and make Joel Embiid cry.
You saw it.
Look, if you need to punch a pillow first, that is fine. But after that, choose.
Then you can reach for an ice cold Coors Light, because with Coors Light, you're getting an ice cold beer when those mountains turn blue on the bottles and cans as they hit that perfect temperature. Thankfully, this past weekend, I didn't need to do a lot of choose and chill. It was a very chill. Chill was the normal mind state for most of the weekend. I got to see friends, sit up on their roof deck, see their new home that they bought late last year. We're just having a grand old time. And when I walked inside just to get out of the sun for a little bit, some ice cold Rocky Mountain refreshment in the refrigerator, the Coors Light, cold layered, cold filtered, cold packaged for a smooth finish. So no matter what those, I won't say the word, people from Denver think of me, I can still enjoy an ice cold Coors Light. So when you choose to rise above it all, choose chill, choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/PHLY basketball. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
We also want to make sure we mention our Die Hard program, in part because Kyle and I have a lot of content coming up here over the next couple of weeks. Most of that will be for Die Hard exclusives, but also because we have an event coming up here Wednesday, June 26th, the Garage Bar at Fishtown. We'll be doing a live show for the NBA draft. So come out, hang out, talk some basketball.
Sixers have the 16th
We've even had
pick.
fans come on the air at various points during these live shows, so maybe we'll get you on air. No promises. We will have microphones and a video camera there. Let's put it that way. So come out and hang out, talk basketball. And like I said, we will have a whole bunch of Die Hard articles. With the Die Hard program, you get a free shirt, you get discounts on merch and events, yada, yada, yada. Go to allphly.com/events. Check that out. We would love to see you there. Because quite frankly, if I have to sit here and just talk to these two all night, it'll be sad and lonely, and I can only take so much, Kyle. So please come out. Please come out and talk to us.
Do you, whenever that shot comes up, do you watch it over? Even though you saw it live, I know you guys, so you watched it when you came home too. Do you watch it?
Yeah, I watch it.
Yeah,
you can't not.
I can still see it in my head, so that's not one of those that I even need to.
I don't even know if I had a reaction. I think it was just mouth open, oh no, I think I yelled something.
No, actually. You definitely yelled. I was sitting right next to you. You were like, oh, that's the loudest I've ever heard Derek at a game was in that moment, because it was so crazy. I hate to be on this again, but it was so crazy hearing complete delirium, complete silence, and then complete delirium. It was like the sound got sucked out of the arena for
the Jimmy play?
4 bounce. Well, yeah. Well,
I was going.
But also
that.
coming out of the timeout, obviously they're all fired up. They're going to go. Toronto's got a chance to win.
And then next thing you know, Kawhi's taking 6 steps and then making a shot.
Yo, so I did the post game right that day.
He traveled,
and I was like, one of the first things I said was, why didn't they call him traveling? It's like, what happened? It's okay to go overtime.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah.
He traveled. He took 4 steps. He turned and gathered and ran. What are you doing here? And that was one of my first reactions to that. But Smy Guy says, never. Can't watch it. Michael Belfatti said, I went into the freezer and let my tears freeze because of that shot.
I don't know if I want
shot.
to ask the context behind that. Michael sent it. Now I'm thinking I have all these like Sopranos images. Like Michael sending us all this dirty money. He's in Portugal hiding out. He's in the freezer doing who knows what. Man.
You had to go,
I'm just teasing you, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm sure all your money has been earned the right way.
Yeah, that was.
You just
that was
wonder. I don't know how we're going to end up talking about this for like 20 minutes. You just wonder how like things would have played out differently. Like, does Jimmy stay?
Yep.
I still think because of the Ben Jimmy dynamic, if they had gone to the finals, I could see there being, but short of that, I think the dynamic with Ben and Jimmy or at the organizational level just made it.
Even if they would have gotten that far, you think that?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing, Jimmy's been very public about his side of it, where he was like, yeah, listen, like they just gave me the ball after Ben was the point guard the whole year. And we know Ben was not very happy about it. He put on I would say, of all the horrible things that Ben did toward the end of his tenure, he put on a good face during that run. Like he didn't complain publicly or dress anybody down for, hey, I'm not the point guard anymore type of deal. But it was certainly brewing behind the scenes. So unless they had won at the highest level, I find it hard to believe
they might have been able to make the finals.
Yeah.
There's a chance.
Yeah, because that Milwaukee team was...
Even if you lost, you got there. And this was the first time, okay, they finally got here. We saw what helped get them there. How can you let that break up?
I mean, let me put it this way. I don't think that duo would have worked long term. I think eventually one or both would have become upset with the situation. You just wonder if, NBA stars have been pretty clear lately. I'll sign that contract, and if it doesn't work, then I'll raise hell and we'll get to the spot I want.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have worked long term, but you do wonder if they would have been brought back.
Mike Belfatti says, no, I was choosing chill. That's what he was doing with the freezer. Choosing chill.
That makes more sense. Yes.
Understood. All right, guys, as we look at this one, Derek, I'll start with you, man, because if we look at Nick Nurse and we lay all that out, we get the comments in there, we get a few super chats, all of our thoughts in the first 30 plus minutes. Where do you look at him in terms of where he is with the rest of the coaches in the league? Where would you put him? Would you put him top 10? Would you put him top 5, top 7, top 3? Where would you have him? 5
to 12 range, somewhere in there. And like when you start talking about coaches in that range, like part of it's going to come down to like, do they have the right players to fit their system? Are they given the resources? But he's above average, but not like in the Spo tier. He's above average.
Spo by himself?
Spo, I think, is in his own tier, frankly.
Right.
So.
Yeah. All right, so 5 to 12. All right, somewhere in there. What are you looking at, Kyle?
I mean, if you just go through the list, Spo, to me, is number 1. After that, there are arguments for a bunch of guys. Like Rick Carlisle obviously did a great job. Tibbs, I have my reservations with, especially as a long-term guy, but did a very good job with the Knicks. Pop is... however you want to weigh the historical stuff versus they haven't been competitive for a little while now. We'll see next year. I still think they're going to slow play this. I don't think they want to do essentially the Pelicans plan where they got Anthony Davis and we're like, we got to win now. And then that creates
or the Sixers plan under Embiid.
Yeah. The cascading effect of we have to compete now. And then if you don't, you just end up irritating the star even earlier. Ty Lue, I really like, but he got outcoached by Jason Kidd in the playoffs. Now, how do you weigh Jason Kidd after this run? They're down 2-0, but he was the better coach in all the other series they were in, which was a shocker to me.
Should spill my Ollie Pop Cola in celebration of Jason Kidd.
Where do you rank Steve Kerr at this point? Because they've fallen off, but obviously... Yeah.
And that's what I mean.
Played a big part in...
5 years ago, Jason Kidd's being made fun of, and Steve Kerr is a coaching god, and now Steve Kerr is struggling.
And then Mike Malone is another name you have to throw in there. Like he was, oh my God, he's a great coach and he's a genius after last year. And now it's
the coach of the year, Mark Daigneault.
Mark Daigneault is another one. That was my preseason prediction.
Yeah,
Pat
yeah.
myself on the back. Yeah. Listen, you picked Chris Finch, so that was we were
had
both
two
right
correct
in the
predictions,
we were
yeah.
right in the mix. I don't think anybody was necessarily wrong on that one. So yeah, I think Nurse is top 10, but I think all these guys, to circle back to Derek's point at the beginning of the show that others have echoed in the chat, so much of it is personnel based, and it's a year to year. Other than I do think Spo has done enough over a long enough period of time that he can be treated as like he's the static top guy until someone proves to me otherwise. But there's a lot of smart coaches out there, and I think it speaks to you have to not just be the Doc Rivers guy, right? Like the CEO, set up one good plan and just hope that's good enough to take you there. You have to do all those CEO type things, right? Like the relationships with players, the culture building, all that type of stuff. You also need to do the tactical adjustments, the X's and O's, the game to game, series to series, week by week, month by month. Whatever team you have in front of you, you have to adjust to get the best out of them. And I think, look, even Rick Carlisle is a guy who at previous stops, the book on him was not that he's always been a sharp basketball guy, right? I think he's not in the like Scott Skiles type territory where he wears on people that quickly, but he can be a bit of a firebrand type guy, like chew some guys out. And so I think he would wear out his welcome with some people. But for all intents and purposes, everything I've heard about him is that he has adapted to his reputation, but also how the league has changed in terms of how you get your message across to players. So my challenge to Nick Nurse would be, you have to keep evolving. You have to look inward and say, okay, what didn't I do on a broader level, not just with the Sixers, but the last few years that I haven't really been in the mix for conference finals type appearances, and say, what do I need to do, regardless of what the roster looks like, to push these guys closer to the title. And I think he is introspective enough that he's definitely having those types of thoughts and conversations with his staff throughout this offseason.
Is there so if Spoelstra is the number one in the tier by himself and everyone else is there, Dagno up and coming, of course, coach of the year this year, Chris Finch for what he's there turning that Minnesota organization around, certainly has the players to do so, but the front office helping out. Do you feel like even with Nurse being in that mix that there's not that much of a separation from the rest of the guys where if you do have the personnel.
Oh, and I didn't even mention Missoula, by the way. And so we talked about him before the show.
For sure.
I think he probably got a bad rap early because he's just, he's the assistant who got promoted. I think he's the best version of that. We have a philosophy. We have a way we play. And I am full sending that. And there are some games where taking 63s and making 10 of them doesn't work. But by and large, he trusts the math. And they've been set up well enough from a roster perspective that they just are a juggernaut. So I don't want to exclude him because obviously they won more games than anybody, and they look like they're on the verge of a title.
But to our point that a lot of it comes down to roster. There's 10 coaches you could give that roster to. They're having a lot. I'm not going to say they're necessarily in the finals. They're having a lot of success.
And you're not taking it away from him. He's there. He's doing it. And a lot of people get turned off too because he has weird interviews and he's a different type of cat when he does these.
The one that resurfaced that killed me was he got asked about the royal family being there, and he goes, "Oh, who? Jesus, Mary, and Joseph?"
Right?
What the fuck is your problem? I don't care about the royal family at all. But whose brain hears that and it's like, that was just. It's very funny.
He's a different dude, man. He is definitely a different dude.
And to be clear, I'm not persecuting him for any religious beliefs. I'm a Catholic, or I was raised Catholic. Anyway, so it's a funny way to hear that and then turn that into.
He's a different cat. And, so with that.
He gets really defensive about the threes, though. Like, if you want to piss him off, just ask him if they took too many threes.
What's his name? Gary Washburn, who covers the Celtics for the Globe. And Gary's like old school, has been covering the league for a long time. And so there's a little bit of that, man, I can't believe they're taking all these threes.
Get Tatum in the post.
And Missoula is just like, hey, Gary, we won 64 games type of deal. So that their individual dynamic is very funny to me. I feel like they're at least 4 times a year, or at least 4 times this season, there was I saw, the Celtics shot like 10 of 45 from 3. And I'm just imagining Gary Washburn doing the like Birdman hand rub, like, ooh, yeah, baby, this is going to be a good post game.
All right, speaking of that, right now it is 2-0 in the finals. Derek and the Celtics are up 2-0. They protected their home floor. As we talk about the coaches, Mazzulla being that, he's getting the better of Jason Kidd right now. What are you seeing as the difference so far?
I mean, they're really good. Like when you're able to shoot that many threes, and Boston, I thought had a lot of good looks early last night.
Yeah.
Like a lot of, they just weren't going in. You're like, all right, if Dallas is going to steal a game, this has got to be it. And then Drew Holiday just had an incredible, incredible game. And look, Drew ended up with a, like, what do you shoot? Like 11 for 15 from the field or something like that.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to talk about Drew now. And good, like talk about him now because he deserves it. But he mostly deserves it for what he does defensively. And when he has one of these games offensively where he's just on fire, now we have an excuse to talk about him. But he has been just incredible here over the last couple of weeks, especially over these 2 games. His defense really helps separate the Celtics from other teams, and especially in this matchup. And then we have a game like last night where he 26 points, 1 turnover,
like
dominating the glass.
Yeah, like 8 layups in the first two quarters. He was just doing his normal Drew stuff where he gets to the paint, wrong foot type of layup, runner over his left shoulder, but he just finds a way, man.
It's point of attack defense, depth of Boston. You've got Boston having a 2-0 lead, and I think Tatum has more shots than points.
I was watching a video, speaking of Drew, where somebody had put it on there. It was an offseason workout, and he was just defending his brother Aaron, an overseas player, some of the people that they were training with. And he's like, this guy's a maniac. Everybody else is working on the offense. He's in there doing his defensive drills and principles in the offseason. And now we're seeing, as you said, we're seeing it all play out right now in real time as they take a 2-0 series lead.
Yeah. And again, not to keep hammering the it's about personnel thing, but I think our conversation we had last week about the downside of a 2-star approach, especially as it pertains to the Sixers, that thesis is playing out in the finals where Boston's high-end depth is better, right? Like, look, we sang the praises of the Mavericks for getting guys like PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford at the deadline and adding to their 2 stars and fleshing this team out. But Boston's top 6 is just better. Like they have higher quality players in those spots. And the variance has swung back to, okay, PJ Washington not shooting as well from 3, Derek Jones Jr. not shooting well from 3, and you need Kyrie to help Luka set that baseline. And Kyrie's not been good. Like he's shot really poorly the first 2 games of the series. You just have no chance unless guys who are career below average to average-ish shooters shoot above the number on the back of the baseball card. And that's the biggest difference in the series is there's Dallas's second star is not doing anything. Whereas Boston has so much depth in high-end talent that Jason Tatum doesn't even have to shoot well. And they win in a blowout in game 1 and they won, I'd say relatively comfortably in game 2. It was fairly close throughout, but there was never really a point in the second half where Dallas was like, other than the late run they went on, Boston overtook them, and it just felt like, yeah, this feels inevitable.
And when they had that run, the Celtics did to really close it out, and it was right around the 4-minute mark. They went on a big-time run, and at that point they pushed it to double digits, and you were like, all right, this one is over.
Yeah, and look, like
scary good.
It's been the thing to envy about the Celtics has been their ability to change over people at the leadership positions and continue to dominate at the managerial level, right? Like Danny Ainge, longtime executive viewed as one of the top guys in the league, right? Like I think he's always been in that kind of top 5 GMs, whatever conversation. So he leaves having, set up the team with the 2 J's and Brad Stevens is the coach. And then it's like, okay, well, Brad Stevens, who at the time, there were people who were like, would you take Brad Stevens over like all the players in the league? He leaves the coaching seat, goes to the front office. Oh, by the way, he's now one of the best executives in the league. Yep. Like the team building stuff he's done since taking over has been great, has nailed these like the Derek White move, the Porzingis trade obviously was a that was a big risk, right? Like Marcus Smart was this foundational leadership player, and he's like, I don't care. I'm going to make this team better. I'm going to take my shot. Worked great. And then they have Ime Udoka, who obviously had the off-court stuff that got him fired, but they had great success under him year one. He leaves, and it's like, well, what do they do now? They promote an assistant, and now they're winning 64 games, and they're about to win a title.
Coach in the pros.
So they cycle through these people, and they're still set up to continue. So I hate to say it on a Sixers show because it is the Celtics, but they are one of the best run organizations in the league easily. You could easily make the case they're number one over the time period that Joel has been in the league for.
So are you saying that they wouldn't have had a collaborative front office in Boston?
Or a guy making burner accounts to tweet disparaging remarks about the player who is now the best player on the team?
When they hired Brian, they started off with a list of 75 candidates. They only interviewed 2, but they started. They made an Excel spreadsheet. They did their due diligence. Just happened to be Brian.
Yeah, it's look, it's all credit to Boston, and obviously there are a lot of institutional figures there at different levels. Mike Zarin has been there for basically all this, right? And there were rumors right around, or I know they approached him when they hired Hinkie, right? Like he was someone that they talked to, and that was a potential. Yep. So there are definitely some people who have been there as they shuffle names in and out in the lead positions. But yeah, that's the big part of it. It's just it hasn't even been consistent management, right? They turned it over, and it's still a machine. And that's supposed to be like consistency is the key to success in a lot of these. They haven't even needed it.
Yeah. I mean, friend of the pod, Danny LaRue, always says ownership is the biggest competitive advantage in professional sports. They have good ownership.
And don't forget about the Drew Holiday as we talk about him. He went out and got him late after the Portland trade and replacing Marcus Smart with Drew Holiday. And yeah, I think most people would agree that as good as he is, Marcus Smart, Drew Holiday is a much better player in this case. So yeah, they look good. And the coaches right now, we'll see what they do when they start on Wednesday. You also wanted to mention Chet Walker, former Sixer, former Bull, passing away this weekend at the age of 84.
One of the greats, man. Obviously, none of us were able to watch him play, but was a foundational piece of one of the great, not just Sixers teams of all time, one of the great teams of all time, and rubbed elbows with, I feel like that era of Sixers history is undercovered in a lot of ways just because that era of the league was undercovered. And a lot of times people look at those Sixers teams as like, well, it was Wilt. Like he was the guy. And obviously he's the best player. But between Wilt and Chet and Hal Greer, like those are 3 all-time greats, like multi-time all-stars, guys who are, they all came together. Like people talk about Wilt's sacrifices that he made, like, oh, he became more of a playmaker and more of a team first player. Well, those guys who had to play alongside him, they had to figure, like, those are high level players who had to tailor themselves around this big 7-footer who dominates touches and dominates the ball. And so, I can't speak to the watched experience of Chet Walker, but all the guys that have been connected to him in the Sixers organization and the people who covered and watched that era all sing his praises. So I wanted to make sure that we acknowledged him today. Shout out to his family. That's about all I got on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more piece from the association just before we came in here. Danny Hurley, Derek had gained some momentum there of taking that, or at least being in the mix for the Lakers job. And apparently he said no.
Oh, I think he said, thank you for the public attention. I'm going to go back and renegotiate my UConn contract now, as I believe what he said, maybe just not publicly. No, it's real interesting now because it's like, all right, well, what do the Lakers do? Do they go back to JJ? Who knows? But it seemed like he turned down a $10 million plus per year contract to go back and try to win a 3rd straight national title, which good on him. We will see whether or not, because we were looking this up before the show. He had just signed basically about a $5 million per year contract. Yep. The year before then, we'll see whether or not that gets renegotiated. You assume it has to be because very few people turn down a doubling of your salary, especially when doubling means an extra $35 million. But yeah, it seemed like he had gained momentum there with the Lakers. It seemed like that was their preferred candidate. Now they are in a little bit of a limbo as they try to loop back and figure out what to do. And that run was unsuccessful.
It's a lot of money, Kyle.
A lot of money.
Turn that down. It's a lot of money.
I said it on Twitter.
They
I
gave you an
knew
extra-
the second that I was really impressed by the meeting and their offer quote came out on Sunday. I was like, there's no shot in hell that he's taking this job. This is all just setting up for him to come back Monday and say,
Where did I see the report?
Thank you, but no thank you.
That his dad and his wife weren't too keen on moving to Los Angeles, or at least specifically his wife.
I will move anywhere in the country for $35 million. Just heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you take that.
Yeah.
job.
So I'm an NBA over college guy. That's why I'm doing this show. I was slightly surprised in that I feel like when this type of opportunity comes, most of these guys say, I want to challenge myself at the highest level, even if it's not a perfect job, right? And the Lakers job is not perfect. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. It's why I don't think they should be hiring someone like JJ Redick, where that's not a diss of JJ's potential acumen. It's more first-time coach in this situation.
That's tough.
It's asking a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm not shocked he didn't I'm a little surprised, but not shocked he didn't take it. But, look, good for him. He knows what he wants and didn't drag it out. These reports started, like Thursday? And by this Monday, it was just like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm going back to Connecticut. I'm going to see out the job here, see if we can win 3 straight, try to put himself in essentially basketball or college basketball immortality.
Because I think it was Mark Stein who threw this out there over the weekend. Please no Jay Wright.
No, Jay.
You can't ruin your legacy. By going to
I don't think Jay Wright's
don't
do
do that.
I don't think so either. But just please no.
No.
Please no.
No.
I think it ends up being Redick
over Borrego.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, we talked about it on the show. That was the name we heard for the month leading up to this out of nowhere Woj bomb about Hurley. So I sort of think it just lands back at that's the guy. And
they're reportedly going to talk to him again. So
yeah. And I know Borrego has done, I think Woj said they've done multiple in-person interviews with him. So clearly there's real interest there. The Cleveland job also interesting. So that's we'll see what happens.
Yes, indeed. And we'll see what happens over the course of the next 24 hours as we reconvene tomorrow here at 2:30 for our next show of the week. But before we go, we got to do our roll call. Say thanks to a lot of people. Kyle, who do you have?
Thank you to all our wonderful people with us here as always. Thank you to Bootzilla, Jay the Jungle, Dave, Rupert Pubkin,
Dave, Rupert, all of us.
Prophet One, Spo Babby.
Oh,
Eugene Ross, who's hating on my hair.
Spo Babby, is that
just for you? I'm not doing my hair again tomorrow, buddy. How about that? My girl Winona, Money Marr, Rick Morse, Marty Bones.
What up, Marty Bones?
Guard Mello. Who else we got in here today? Randy Rubart, as always,
what
checking
up, Randy?
in on my own yams now. It's my guy.
It's my guy. Said he can't watch
Michael
the Kawhi
B in
shot.
Portugal, as always. What up to Michael? Bucket Getter 215. Who the hell is Derek Bodner in this chat? Never
buckets.
heard of that guy. Phi Chi. Who else? Who are our super chatters today, Tyler? If we can pull this back up. Brian Pumper and DFJ Hoops. Thank you. Thank you to Elliot Vincent, Lost Sleep TV. Valhos is in here.
What up,
Lamont
Val?
Wilson is in here. Keith B is in here.
Keith B.
Don Juan 3900, who said, I have
brother,
the
is it?
Draco Malfoy hair today. I resent that, although I do think if we're getting into Harry Potter territory, I fit into the Slytherin house quite nicely. Everybody, thanks for being with us on Monday. If you
man.
could, and you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you get notifications each and every time we go live. And if you hit the thumbs up
It's in
button,
the other studio.
no
It's in the
bell.
other studio.
You sons of bitches.
Ding.
If you hit the thumbs up button, not only will they maybe remember the bell tomorrow, but I'll maybe remember to do something with my hair so you don't have to look at it all flopping around on my head on YouTube. So thank you as always. We'll be back 2:30 on Tuesday, and the rest of the week, we'll see you then.
Thanks, Tyler.
Work like the mayor.